So, in this screencast, we're going to be looking at customer decision making and talking through the processes involved when we come to buy something. So, this is solely based around one particular theory of customer decision making, and we're going to be having a look at how that actually works in practice. So, it's important for the exam that obviously you know the theory around customer decision making, you know some of the kind of different elements to it, which we'll talk through. But then you also know the limitations as well, and that you are able to apply this and make give a practical example of how the customer decision making process works. Okay, so when we think about customer decision making, there's a few different things that we need to take into account. First of all, we obviously need to think about the context that we're making this decision in as customers. So this theory says that basically whenever we come to buy something, we go through this kind of logical scheme of stages where we make different decisions that feed into the ultimate decision around whether to buy something or not, or what we're actually going to buy. So we'll go through the model on customer decision making in just a second, but there's just some other points to think about in addition to the context. So we also need to think about, is this a high or low involvement decision, which I'm going to come to on the next slide, but you'll remember that high involvement decisions are the ones that are very risky, tend to be expensive, although sometimes they could just be risky in terms of you just want to get something right. Or whether it's a low involvement purchase, so something that you're not particularly as a customer that bothered about, and is a fairly habitual purchase, perhaps something that you're very, very familiar with. And then how that impacts the level of decision making, because of course, when we make high involvement decisions, they tend to, the process is much more extended. Okay, and then as we said earlier, the level of risk involved, and that risk can be financial risk, it could be safety risk. So it may be that, you know, we want to purchase something that gives us the kind of best, safest option. You think about things like insurance, or it could be social risk. So getting the right brand, you know, not wearing the wrong, if you're a teenager, you don't want to be wearing the wrong brand of trainers or whatever it might be. But also recognising that this process does have its limitations. So it fundamentally assumes that every decision we make is rational, and we go through a really logical process step by step. So, you know, it's not taking account of those possible emotional influences or when we behave irrationally as consumers and we don't buy something that's necessarily the kind of obvious best choice. We might be influenced by brand or peers or something else. And also it fails to take account of potential situational influences that you might come across. So the salesperson in the store, or just the mood in a shop or something like this that might influence your decision making on that particular day. So let's move on and have a look at levels of decision making. So the level of involvement is about our kind of perceived relevance of something based on our needs. So we're looking at what our needs are and thinking about that need that we want to satisfy, and we're looking at how important is that particular object to meeting our needs. So how involved in the decision might we get? So as we said earlier, high involvement decisions tend to be very much kind of big ticket purchases that we might only even really make once in a lifetime, or we certainly don't make these decisions very often. They're infrequent. It might be a car, it could be buying a house, it could be booking a holiday. So it might be something that we do perhaps once a year or a little bit more often than that. But on the whole, it's a very infrequent purchase. And because it's an infrequent purchase, we tend not to be quite so familiar with this type of purchase. So it means that the process becomes more extended, which we'll come to in a second. There's higher risks involved, and again, those risks could be financial, could be social, as we said in the last slide. But that means that we need to take our time over the decision. And then low involvement, so being much more kind of those habitual purchases. So Kat Ferrer and Laurent argue that there are these different types of involvement, so how interested we are in the product category. So is this something that we have a real vested interest in? If if you're a football player and you're buying a new pair of football boots, then you might be highly invested in that, and therefore it becomes a high involvement decision. It could be how much pleasure we're likely to derive from the product. Is this something, is it a really nice expensive bar of chocolate? Is it an experience? So perhaps going to Alton Towers or going on holiday. The ability to express the self. So is this a brand that we're going to use to convey who we are to other people, and therefore it becomes important for those reasons? What's the risk of getting it wrong? So what's the negative impact? And sometimes this might be in a really rational sense. So if we buy a car and it breaks down all the time, it's unreliable. Or equally, if we buy a brand and it's not the right brand, it doesn't convey the correct impression we want it to make about ourselves. And what's the probability of getting it wrong, making the wrong decision? Okay, so let's have a look at the process then. So you can see here, this is the customer decision making process, and it's primarily focused on business to consumer. We've looked at B2B, but it tends to be a lot more extended and has the negotiation in it. This diagram can be viewed, or in most of the books, the Kotler and Armstrong books certainly would have a section on this. It's worth doing a bit of reading up about it. So we start off with that problem recognition, where we are recognizing that we have a need that we want to fulfill. And sometimes this problem recognition could come from external stimulus, so things like advertising or seeing a friend's new laptop, new phone, new pair of shoes, or it might come from internal stimulus. So it could be that we feel hungry, it could be that we're feeling like low in self-esteem and we want to buy something to make ourselves feel happy. We then move to the information search. So this is where we search around for appropriate information to help inform our decision. And as we've said in the lectures, if this is something very habitual, bar of chocolate, information search might be very, very quick just in our minds, and we're not conscious that we're doing it. We just whiz through the process really quickly. It's a low risk decision, low involvement. If you're going to book a holiday, the likelihood is that you're going to spend a considerable amount of time researching it, looking at different hotels, looking at different destinations, perhaps reading other people's reviews now online. Some people might go into travel agents and talk to travel agents about it, or use an online travel agent. So that information search is much more extended, is the point. It takes more time. We then move to evaluation and selection. So this is where we basically evaluate our different options, and obviously only the ones that we're aware of will fall into this. But we look at our different options in relation to that information search, and we start to formulate some decisions. So we might then develop a choice set. So we might have 2 or 3 brands in our choice set where we think we're going to choose brand A, B, or C, before we make our final choice, which is the next step. Okay, so we spend a bit of time, and again, that evaluation in a habitual purchase at one end of the scale would be very quick. We might just very quickly look at the different options and think, right, I'm going to go with this, and might be a little bit more impulsive. But with a high involvement purchase, even a new race suit, swimming costume costs quite a lot of money. A new pair of football boots, if you're a reasonable football player, then you might spend a bit of time trying different ones on, and evaluating how well you think they're going to meet your needs. You might search around, look what other people are wearing, so that could come into your decision as well. So when you make a selection and your choice and decision to purchase, some authors call this store choice and purchase, as you decide like where you're going to buy it from, but then you also go and make that purchase too. So you make your decision, but then the process, and so you go out and buy the particular product or consumer service, whatever it might be. Now the process doesn't finish here, because then we have this important stage of post-purchase evaluation. So this is where we evaluate what we bought against our original needs and decide how well our needs were met, and that then means that the next time we make that particular decision, whether it be something that we're buying regularly, so it's fairly soon, this feeds into that next cycle of decision making. So we use this stage is really important, and here companies might they might sort of advertise and communicate on the basis of, sometimes it's just about reinforcing the purchase that consumers have made, so that they feel they've made the right decision, so that the next time they return to that then same brand. Okay, so this is a process that goes through stages, and in the exam, the kind of thing that you would be expected to do is be able to obviously remember each stage, explain what happens at each stage, give some practical examples. Always be aware of talking about the things we talked about on this slide, where we're talking about the different elements you need to consider and some of the limitations as you talk through each of the different stages. So make sure you've got an example you can talk about, and you're aware of the nature of that example. Is it high or low involvement? Is it likely to be complex extended decision making, or is it kind of habitual, kind of very, very low involvement? Okay, so those are the kind of things that you need to be revising and be aware of, and make sure you're able to articulate in the exam.